are plenty of seats down this way, so please come on in.
The metro stop by, about half a block down, or take it, whatever train comes takes you right here. Ends here, so you don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
Come on. There are plenty of seats there. Just most of them are headed down this way.
Buy the card for $2, and it's $2.50 per mile. Right there at the station.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today to the FMCSA listening session. I'm really loud, aren't I? The FMCSA listening session on highly automated commercial vehicles. I'd like to introduce our panel and then go over how the session will proceed. But I just have to say we're so happy to see so many friends and familiar faces and stakeholders here today. Start to my left, we have Daphne Jefferson. She is our Deputy Administrator at Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. To her left is Jack Van Steenberg, our Assistant Administrator and Chief Safety Officer. Larry Miner, our Associate Administrator for Policy. Steve Smith, the Director of the Office of Analysis, Research, and Technology. And we also have joining us from NHTSA, Dee Williams, who is the team leader of the Federal Automated Vehicles Policy Implementation Team. And I'm Shannon Watson, I'm Senior Policy Advisor, and I am facilitating today. First, I would like to turn it over to Daphne Jefferson for opening remarks. I don't think this is on. I don't think so. Is it now? Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I want to thank you for joining us this morning, both the folks here in the room and for those who are joining us via our live webcast. And a special thanks to CVSA for hosting today's public listening session and to the FMCSA team that pulled this all together and made it possible. All of us share an interest in highway safety, and we're in the midst of an exciting time as we look towards cutting-edge technology that could one day transform safety, travel, and commerce. Interest in automated vehicles, particularly highly autonomous automated commercial vehicles, continues to grow. And meanwhile, vehicle manufacturers and technology developers continue to design, demonstrate, and test advanced driver assistance systems for highly autonomous commercial vehicles. At FMCSA, we encourage these developments and applaud the innovators who are working towards breakthroughs in traffic safety. And we regard autonomous vehicles and highly autonomous vehicles as an opportunity for safety. I think one of the key drivers for us has been the possibility of improving safety on our nation's highways. And we recognize also that it's our responsibility to ensure testing and eventual deployment of commercial vehicles using these automated safety systems are conducted in a way that ensures the highest levels of safety for the motoring public. But this is our first FMCSA-sponsored public listening session on highly automated commercial vehicles, but it's not our first foray into the topic. Since last fall's CVSA meeting in Little Rock, Arkansas, we've done a few things. We've reviewed all of our safety regulations that will impact highly automated commercial vehicles to determine which ones of those will be impacted by varying levels of automation. We've done technology scans with developers and innovators nationwide. We've also conducted several briefings with congressional staff. And in January, we held a series of meetings. The first was with stakeholders at USDOT's Washington headquarters. We held a roundtable at the International Transport Forum, and we also hosted a session at the Transportation Research Board annual meeting in Washington, D.C. Now, our primary focus here today is ensuring that federal regulations provide appropriate standards of safe operation for all commercial vehicles, including highly automated commercial vehicles at each stage in the development process. And one of the things that I like to say is that our goal is not to impede progress, but for us as regulators to try to run alongside development as it moves forward so that we're understanding what's going on and we can continue to be the voice of safety in the room. And so we welcome your comments on the application of regulatory provisions regarding several key pieces. The first is commercial driver's licenses, driver qualifications, use of electronic devices, hours of service, and inspection, repair, and maintenance. And finally, given that we're at CVSA, how enforcement officials could identify CMVs capable of various levels of automated operation and the types of highly automated commercial motor vehicle equipment that can be effectively inspected at the roadside. Now, there are a lot of smart people in the room with us this morning, and I anticipate this being a very interesting and lively discussion. We want to hear from all viewpoints, and we want to hear from everybody in the room. And we've also have an opportunity for those who are listening to also provide comments. We'll use the feedback from today's session as well as comments that will be posted to the docket, and the docket will remain open until July 17th to help inform us in the appropriate next steps for us to take. Once again, I want to thank you all for your participation and for being here, and to thank CVSA for being our host. And now I want to turn it back over to Shannon Watson, our Senior Policy Advisor in FMCSA's Office of Policy, to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Is this off now? Okay. Thank you very much, Daphne. And first, I'd like to go over a couple of what we call ground rules informally. First of all, there are restrooms out this exit, men's and women's rooms. Is there anyone here who, we just would like to see a show of hands, who is certified in CPR? Okay, good. We hope we won't need to call on you, but we're glad to see so many who are in the event that something untoward happens. Also, we just want to make sure that everybody who comes up, please come to the mic one at a time. I'll call on you. You can raise your hand or walk to the mic. And we'd like you to introduce yourselves by first and last name, spell your last name, and then also state your affiliation. We are doing two different kinds of transcripts today. We have the webcast, so all of you will be on TV, and, well, actually computer, I guess. And we also have we have a court reporter who is taking a detailed transcript, so that helps both of them maintain the accuracy of your name and the spelling. So the major point of the listening session is that we are here to listen to you. The panel, they are all well versed in this topic, but they will be asking you clarifying questions on points that you make. So today is about you. So I'd like to open it up and see who would like to be the first one at the mic. I know. And people in the room who know me know that if you don't go up, I'll call on you. So we'll get going that way. Okay, we can't listen if you don't speak.
You heard the deputy administrator talk. You know, we want to hear comments on drivers, driver qualifications, hours of service, inspections, about markings of these type of vehicles. We're talking commercial vehicles. What about motor coaches? What about commercial vehicles carrying hazmat? What about security systems? What about inspecting these vehicles pre-trip and so forth with this type of equipment? So these are some topics that we're looking to get some information so at some point we can make an informed decision and work with you. So I just wanted to give you some ideas, things that we're looking at as well.
Thank you, Jack. Those are good points. And if you just indulge me for a minute, I think either on the second sheet of your agenda or on the back of your agenda, there are some discussion questions that were in the Federal Register notice. And I'll just read those to give you a chance to frame everything. FMCSA seeks information on issues that need to be addressed to ensure that the federal safety regulations provide appropriate standards for the safe operation of HACVs from design and development through testing and deployment. Specifically, FMCSA welcomes comments on the application of the following regulatory provisions entitled 49 CFR to HACVs. 1. Part 383, Commercial Driver's Licenses. 2. Part 391, Qualification of Drivers. 3. Sections 39280 and 39282, Use of Electronic Devices. 4. Part 395, Hours of Service of Drivers. And 5. Part 396, Inspection, Repair, and Maintenance. FMCSA requests comments on how enforcement officials could identify CMVs capable of various levels of automated operation and the types of HACV equipment that can be effectively inspected at the roadside. The agency welcomes opportunity to work with all interested parties to identify actions that may be necessary to address regulatory barriers while ensuring the safe operation of HACVs. And we have our first person.
Yeah, I'm Jack Roberts. I'm senior editor with Heavy Duty Trucking Magazine, and I guess I'll do my civic duty and start this off.
Could you spell your last name, please?
Sure, Roberts. I've been covering the rise of autonomous vehicles for several years now, and I've actually have a CDL endorsement to operate autonomous truck. I've driven one in Nevada when Freightliner released their model. I've written a lot about this. So one of the things that I'm curious about is I think that in the initial stages, drivers will like this. I sort of liken it to cruise control on steroids. But the sort of hard, cold fact is that when you're behind the wheel and the truck is in full autonomous mode, there's not really a lot for you to do. Now, current regulations state there has to be a driver in the seat at all times, sort of minding the shop. Now, being a truck driver is an incredibly difficult job. You're away from home for extended periods of time. There's a lot of domestic strife that goes along with this. You miss softball games, you miss PTA meetings. And so an early thought I had when I was in one of these vehicles was, you know, if it were suddenly possible for a driver in full autonomous mode to Skype into a PTA conference back at home, for example, or, you know, interact with his wife in some way, or even just be on Facebook while the truck was going down the road, it would certainly add to their quality of life, although this is completely forbidden in the regulations at the moment. So I'm just curious, for lack of any other topic to start things off, how you see the role of the driver bored. You know, he can be in the seat. If the truck's in autonomous mode and he's completely bored out of his mind and checked out, that's just as dangerous as if he's in the back in the sleeper. So I'm just sort of curious as to how you think this whole driver attention thing is going to evolve with autonomous vehicle, because it's going to be an issue.
That's a great question to start, and that's, we're looking at driver behavior as well. So that's a part of the discussion that will take place over, I think, over the next few months and probably in the next couple of years as we continue to progress. But thank you for being the first one to get up with the question.
Larry, did you?
A lot of your comments, too, are addressing the ATRI report. You know, if you look at the ATRI report, and as the deputy said, you know, these are the comments that we want to hear over time as we move forward. And we saw some in that report, and we've heard people talk about those concerns that the drivers had, you know, paying attention, quality of life, and so forth like that. And, you know, we'd like to hear other comments on your comments, too, but we're familiar with those concerns and something that we want to hear about.
Good morning, panel. Good morning, panel. Good morning to everybody. I am Srinivas Javangula. I go by Java. So if you want to spell my name, I guess just do Java. I had a couple of questions, I guess.
Do you want to spell your last name, though?
Okay. It is Javangula. Okay. I'm from the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency. With reference to drivers, would there be an indication, I mean, driver and the truck, would there be an indication on the truck saying that it is a driverless vehicle, like a tag or something written on the side of the truck, or like a decal? I'm not sure, like, if that is what one of the plans you're looking at. And in terms of the driver, would the driver's license indicate that they're driving a driverless vehicle or automated vehicle? And the third one I was thinking is with reference to who's at fault when something goes wrong. Right now, you can blame the driver, you know. Would it be the driver, or would it be the vehicle, or would it be the company? that has installed the systems in those vehicles, or would it be the carrier? So those are some of the things I've been thinking of. If something goes wrong, so how would the enforcement aspect and other legal aspects take place?
So one of the questions, you talked about markings and then the driver, and then you talked about the crash accountability. So the markings is one of the subjects that I did want to hear about it. You know, back in January when we had a session back at DOT headquarters, we talked about markings. And originally, I thought markings was a good idea, but now I heard the counters, you know, the other sides of markings. So you have a vehicle that's marked, you're letting law enforcement know that this vehicle is equipped with advanced driver assistance systems, or there's the technology that's helping, you know, with this automation. But you also let everybody else know too. So I don't have the answer right now. This is what we want to hear. So do you mark, do we require markings of the vehicles, or do we not? You know, I guess there's pros and cons. And, you know, we heard both sides of those back in January about marking. And again, these are comments that we want to hear from the public. Do we mark? Do we require marking? Do we not? Right now, there's no requirement to mark these vehicles. And as for accountability and fault, well, right now there is a driver. So for those who don't know, I retired from the New York State Police, but 25 years in law enforcement. The driver is the one who's held accountable for crashes. And then if you go beyond the initial crash, then there's the liability of someone. And right now, you know, a carrier probably, but I don't know, but right now the driver is responsible for those vehicles. And if you go beyond that, then someone else is responsible. And that's not for me to determine who's, you know, responsible down the road. But so you brought up very interesting topics that we've heard. And, you know, again, we want to hear the comments. And so that was the first and third. And the second one was something to do with, what was the second? Driver?
The driver license, would the license?
Oh, the endorsement or something like that?
Yeah.
So right now, I don't know if is maybe one state requires these type of endorsements. I don't have that answer right now. We don't require, FMCSA does not require a special endorsement for autonomous operation.
Okay, with reference to vehicles again, like right now you have to have a DOT number. So if you are an autonomous driven vehicle, would there be something else that would need to be on the vehicle to identify it?
So right now, as a matter of fact, you heard the deputy administrator talked about, we did a technology scan and a scan of the industry. We right now, and there's probably more, we see about 7 or 8 carriers that are registered with us, just, you know, regular, have operating authority, they have the proper insurance on file, and they can operate. Right now, we do not require anything beyond the regular means of operating a commercial vehicle in commerce.
Thank you.
Anybody else has anything else to say?
Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. How are you? My name is Anthony Griffith, Griffith. I'm the president of A.W. Griffith Transportation Consulting. I've also been a bus operator, motor coach operator for, in June, it'll be 35 years. Addressing the issue of driver responsibility. Driver responsibility, under normal circumstances, a driver is involved in the process of an accident from the beginning to the end, from the time the vehicle starts to lose control to the time of whether he's able to recover the vehicle or till the time of the crash. With an automated vehicle, one of the reasons I feel that the driver should not be responsible if the vehicle is operating in automation is because if the driver is not fully in control of the vehicle at the beginning of the incident, he now is being tossed into the incident somewhere in the middle, and now has to do all the normal things like try to figure out what's wrong, what's going wrong, having the vehicle release itself to the driver, now regain control. In airplanes, this type of automation, this stuff happens all, where the plane releases itself to the pilot. They have anywhere between a minute to 20 minutes sometimes to actually figure out what's wrong and then make corrections and then reapply the automation. With a vehicle, especially a commercial motor vehicles, you have approximately 1 to 2 seconds to now do something that you would have normally been involved in the beginning of the process. Now you're tossed into the process somewhere in the middle. And a lot of times you're just along for the ride, so to speak. So that's one of my thoughts on that, sure.
Anthony, I got the pleasure to meet Anthony last month at one of the bus meetings, and I am so glad you're here. And for everybody who doesn't, Anthony's he's a driver, well-decorated driver, crash-free driver, and has received many awards. So, and he really struck me as knowing what he's talking about. So, first of all, thanks for showing up here, and congratulations on your history of crash-free driving. And it's your comments are duly noted.
Thank you.
And Anthony did talk about one other thing, is you talked about anticipate versus reaction, but I think Larry's going to talk to your comments, so welcome.
This is a clarifying question. You talked about not having the driver be responsible in the event that the automated system is engaged. Would you base that on the level of automation, that at a certain level where the driver could, in theory, get up from behind the wheel because the system is so complex and so reliable that it's truly driving the vehicle by itself? So at that point where the driver gets up from behind the wheel, would those be the types of crashes where the driver should not be held accountable? Or are you looking at lower levels of automation where perhaps the driver still needs to be there for whatever reason to periodically operate the vehicle?
Well, if the driver at any point has a responsibility of operating the vehicle, then the automation, like, for example, we have different levels of automation. Even at level 3 automation is not still where the driver is not necessary. We're talking about something where the driver can turn away and read a book while the vehicle itself is going down the road. If that is the case and the vehicle encounters something, and with automation, like even with Tesla situations where the vehicle releases itself to the driver, it says, listen, I don't know what this is, here, you do it. And at the point that it says you do it, it depends on where you are in that process, whether you have the ability to fix it or not. If the automated vehicle is driving and it releases itself to you in a situation where you have not the ability to fix it, you can't be held responsible for that. Plus the fact that you also have to consider the things that automation take away, which is the perception and the reaction of the driver. It doesn't take it away in that situation. You still have 1.5 seconds of perception and reaction to figure out what's going on. So in that time, a vehicle, depending on the speed of the vehicle, can travel to 60 miles an hour, 88 feet. So, in 1.5 seconds, you've traveled 100 and something feet toward whatever it is that you need to try to avoid.
I guess another follow-on question, to get your perception on how you think this technology may advance. Do you ever see it getting to the point where it's a full level 5 system and it's truly capable of sensing and detecting almost anything that a human driver would have to detect, and that it's capable of responding in an appropriate manner? Do you see us getting to that point, or see the vendors getting to that point with all the technology that they're working on?
From the studies that I've done, from the things that I've been reading, from the people I've spoken to, who are some people NASA-wise, and they're talking about IT learning, or, learning where the computer learns because it's in a situation or if it's driving. There's way not enough, if that's a proper, way to say it, use of simulation. Where use of simulation, you can test and test and test and test and create scenarios and recreate scenarios over and over and over again without being on the road, without putting people in jeopardy, excluding the drivers. Because in order to get the amount of miles you need to get the matrix, as far as I understand, you're going to need billions of miles. People are not going to be able to do that as effectively as if you do it through simulation over and over, because you can repeat the same situation in a simulator with different results. I've driven a run in Brooklyn going to JFK Airport for 13.5 years. Same run, back and forth, 4 times a night. Every night for 13 and a half years. It has never been the same. So to get a computer to learn something that I've done in 13 and a half years, to never encounter the same thing, how is it going to react to all of these different scenarios if it has never been placed in it? And it took me 13 and a half years.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Next.
Who?
I was thinking him, and I was giving to you.
Okay,
Yeah.
I heard the name Griffith, I didn't know.
No.
Good morning, my name is Richard Bishop, B-I-S-H-O-P. I've been very involved in truck automation for the last several years and been in the world of vehicle automation for about 25 years.
Excuse me, would you state your affiliation?
My
first?
affiliation is with Bishop Consulting.
Okay. Thank you.
And so I have a couple of comments from some of my involvements. Specifically, I'm leading a task force on automated driving and platooning for the Technology and Maintenance Council of the American Trucking Association. We've been active since 2014, generated some white papers, which I hope you've seen. If not, I can facilitate that. Let me be clear that my comments are only my own, not that of ATA or TMC. But that's had a user community together, sort of the voice of the user, working some of these issues. I'm also a co-contributor to a project, a study done by the University of Florida for the state of Florida, legislatively mandated to look at level 1 truck platooning. So there's lots of things I could respond to. I just have a couple of comments. I think it's important, even from the comments and discussion we've had already, to really look at what's different with regard to automation for trucks versus automations for vehicles in general. I think there's a huge amount that's common to both cars and trucks, such that FMCSA doesn't have to go it alone and figure that out. It's great that this is a NHTSA FMCSA panel because it makes sense. So it's about being very, very specific about what's unique to the trucking world. There are unique things, but that's important. I think one key point I want to make regards hours of service, because obviously it's an interesting situation. We have a little more market activity, startup activity in driverless because hours of service is sitting in the middle. And in a way it distorts the market. There would be more technology investment, private investment in level 3 systems, for instance, if hours of service were such that you could get a return on investment if the driver's in the vehicle while the driver's not driving. But with current rules, of course, you can't get that benefit, so there's not as much business investment in that space. So my question would be, of course, hours of service is a very, very contentious place. But my suggestion would be to assume the technology works just great, that's not a question. And if that's the case, what would be the pathway for FMCSA to do the studies, do the research, what are the questions that have to be answered to get to a place that say, okay, that driver can be in the cab, in automated mode, he's on duty, not driving, or whatever. And I think there would be a very, very contribution to the whole industry to start that process as early as possible. My last point, Mr. Minor, to your question about level 4, to the previous speaker, I think the technology will certainly get us there. The key is it's not about what level, it's what level and what operational design domain. Level 4 in traffic jam assist on the highway under, say, 30 miles an hour, that's much, much easier and simplistic compared, of course, to level 4 on any type of road. So I think the technology will get there, but we have to look at those, specific use cases. Thank you.
I guess one clarifying question or follow-up question on hours of service. Conceptually, if you could look in your crystal ball and look towards the future, if we get these vehicles that can truly drive themselves and respond appropriately to almost any set of circumstances that hop up, and you've got a situation where the driver could perhaps get up from behind the wheel and get in the sleeper berth, can you see us making changes to the hours of service to at least create a scenario where the driver can just log it as sleeper berth time because he can truly get up from behind the wheel? And if you have a situation where maybe it's not quite at the full level 5 and the driver is not really working that hard while the vehicle is operating itself, what would be your concept of how the hours of service could account for a situation where maybe the driver is not in the sleeper berth, but perhaps the driver workload isn't as much as it would be if the driver were operating?
I wish I had an answer for you, but I'm not a deep expert in hours of service and all the intricacies of that. So my opinion wouldn't be that useful on that. But I think the settings are out there to explore that. I did a study for the state of Florida on automated drayage around the ports. And of course, we know that the trucks back up at some of the port gates. And so you've got a very slow-moving group of trucks for maybe half a mile. Those are situations where you could tiptoe into that world and say, well, what if this guy whose truck never goes over 5 miles an hour while it's taking 2 hours to get to that gate, what can we learn from a situation like that? So I think it's about getting that thought process started, even as contentious as HOS is.
And you had mentioned a study that you were doing for Florida. Could you share a copy with us?
Yeah, it's not finished yet, but this was required by the Florida legislature to do a study on driver-assistive truck platooning, the level 1 platooning, which should be out mid-summer, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Appreciate it. And as our next speaker is coming to the microphone, I'd like to take a moment to plug our webcast. As we are webcasting, we also have the ability for those of you who are at home in a safe and stationary position and not behind the wheel of a CMV or any other kind of automobile. We would like for you to send your questions or comments in, and you can do that via the link on the email, and they come to me and I'll read them out and I'll intersperse the comments with those in the room. So please do participate this way. Our next speaker, please.
Thank you. My name is Fred Koval, K-O-V as in Victor, A-L-L, and I'm with Anderson Trucking Service. My question is, as long as the driver is in the truck, other than an endorsement, why would anything about licensing, driver's records, maintenance records, or any of that information be different than what it is now? In regards to hours of service, if the driver has to be in the truck and has to have some control over it, how many hours in a row can you pay attention doing nothing? Right now, they can do that for 11. And you want to extend that beyond that? I think that's a little unreasonable. If the driver comes out from behind the seat and can go into the sleeper berth, why do you have him in the truck? It's one more person to be hurt in an accident. So if the truck can operate itself, why do you put a driver in it? Thank you.
One quick follow-up question. I guess it will be helpful to clarify that there's going to be a lot of years as this technology is being developed, and there's the end state where maybe the truck can, from loading dock to its final destination, drive itself. But we're looking for feedback for all the steps in between now and then, that at some point we would have some intermediary point where maybe you'd need a driver in to get it up to the highway, and then once you get it onto I-95, maybe it can go the next 200 miles down the highway, and then the driver would resume control as we get close to the exit ramp. So that would be the transition between now and the future when the truck can drive itself. So we're looking for all kinds of feedback on what are the things that the agency would need to do to make sure we're safe as we make this journey from the current state to the future state.
I don't doubt we will get to a point where the truck can go down the road safely without an operator. Maybe the operator is in another state. They're doing it with drones all over the place. Then the question becomes, how many vehicles can you operate at once? Do you need a license? Do you need a driver's file? So at that point, I could see a lot of questions coming up. But as the driver stays behind the wheel, My biggest concern is how do we keep them occupied? How do we keep them busy? How do we keep them awake?
And a follow-up question to something you said about maintenance records or maintenance responsibilities for the fleets that are operating these autonomous vehicles. Do you see any of the technology being so complicated that the agency would need to consider some special maintenance requirements to make sure that all these advanced features that are going to enable the vehicle to operate safely by itself, making sure that those features are actually working properly before they dispatch this autonomous vehicle?
Well, I would think that would all be part of a pre-trip. And right now, they can plug a computer into a truck and tell you an awful lot, or a car, about what's going on in multiple systems. I would think at some point it could do it through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth and simply pass on to the maintenance facility what is working on the truck and what is not. Our cars will tell us what our tire pressure is. They'll tell us what's wrong with the truck. They'll tell us what's wrong with the engine. Why couldn't that information be passed on electronically continuously? And once it's electronic, keeping records of it would be awfully easy.
Thank you.
I do have, you brought up a really interesting point about the driver and keeping that driver alert. And, you know, in case the system is operating on its own. You know, it's something that, you know, there are manufacturers here and so forth like that. Are there alerts on these vehicles that will make a driver keep their hands on the wheel, or something go off every so often that, you know, a sound? So just something I throw out there to the manufacturers. But you brought up a very good and valid point of, you know, fatigue and alertness and paying attention. So I'd like to hear, you know, if there's anybody in here that could address that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Koval. Oh, we have one from the webcast. Brian Hammer, Hammer, of Nationwide Insurance, says, I think the addition of technology that makes highly automated vehicles makes maintenance a very critical point. Having some technical difficulties. The idea of a community college diesel tech also handling the high-tech components makes me a little worried. What standards on maintenance personnel would be established? Are there any comments from the panelists?
I guess just as background, to make it clear that right now, under our inspection, repair, maintenance rules, we do have a special provision for the individuals that are responsible for the brake-related inspection, repair, and maintenance tasks. And I think that's the only place where we specifically lay it out, and also for the individual doing the annual inspection. So that's a valid point as to whether the agency needs to consider any special requirements for the maintenance personnel that are going to check to make sure that an automated systems are working properly.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Morning. My name is Louis Hotard, Hotard. I'm Director of Tech Service for ABC Bus, who distributes Von Hoover motor coaches in the U.S. I've been before some of you folks before, and this kind of led into my comments about maintenance. Everything up to now has been that everything functions fine. And since we were at a CVSA meeting, we constantly talk about inspections and roadside and things like that. My comment is I think we're making airplanes out of Model T trucks still, if you will, and we don't have the infrastructure of FAA, Federal Railroad, or other things so that roadside personnel or everybody else knows what to do with vehicles when they are dealing with them on roadside. We're still just debating how to inspect disc brakes and slack adjusters. So, you know, I don't think we're there yet. Inspecting an automated system, everything runs on sensors. You know, do we inspect the automation part of the system on roadside? So, you know, there's a lot to go on to be discussed about inspection and maintenance on vehicles, and that seems to always be pushed to the bottom of the pile, as it was number 5 on this docket. But nothing else will work if the maintenance isn't there. And also, because we're CMVs, the the duty of providing those vehicles safely resides with every operator. And where you're in aircraft and railroad, you have such a small amount of providers of that. The data is better, the inspectors are better, whether it's a Boeing or an Airbus or a Rolls-Royce engine or a GE. There's no open questions about maintenance on those vehicles. It is what it is. And as an industry, the highway side, I just don't think we're there yet because we're too broad in our support for our vehicles and how we maintain our vehicles. Just food for thought, and I don't have any answers, just something that I think we need to look at. Thank you.
Okay, and before we go to our next in-person speaker, we have another email from Brent Hankins, Hankins, and he writes, a question for the panel. Does FMCSA anticipate recognizing a level 4 or 5 automated system as the driver for the purposes of hours of service?
I mean, right now, we're in a listening mode. We want to hear the comments, and at some point, we will be making decisions. But right now, you know, we see the industry at the levels 3 and 4, and eventually some of the industry will be working up to that level 5. And, you know, we want to be ready to address that level 5, but right now we're in the listening mode. We want to hear what everybody else thinks, and we want to hear the facts. So, but we're prepared to address it down the road.
Thank you, Jack. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. Angelo Gibson with Werner Enterprises, last name Gibson, Gibson. So just a couple things. You know, there's obviously different levels of autonomy out there, and we're talking about highly automated, which one thing I want to make sure that we talk about is we need drivers, right? Highly automated is, you know, who knows where that's going to lead or when we're going to be there. And so I guess one question to the panel or something to think about is, what's the opinion on when we're going to be there, how we're going to be there, what's that really look like? No secret, there's a driver shortage. There's talk about that increasing even more significantly over the years. So I want to make sure that we're thinking about that and talking about that. And really what we're all trying to go after here is a safer vehicle out on the road. And through autonomy, we want to make sure that we keep that in the forefront. You know, Werner Enterprises has invested lots of dollars in safe equipment, some of the autonomy that's out there, and we believe in safety, and that's one thing we want to make sure that we keep at the forefront as we're talking through autonomy. And then Daphne, you mentioned when you were speaking, you talked about enforcement of autonomy and enforcement of autonomous equipment, but what is that, I guess the question is, you know, what does that really mean? How do you get there? You know, do mechanics get trained differently? Do enforcement get trained differently? Do we have that infrastructure out there? So a lot to think about as we're thinking about autonomy. So,
Just a quick follow-up for you, and we don't have the answers to
Sure.
those questions. And a big part of what we're trying to do is to really gather as many questions as we can to be able to start answering them. And they're each probably between research, analysis, but from the perspective of the industry, where would you see us going as far as in your operation, say between now and 5 years from now, where you may have somewhat of a mixed environment? What does that look like as far as driver recruitment, as far as the maintenance folks?
Sure. So, you know, in my world, I live in operations, you know, working with drivers every day, day in and day out. And, you know, today you have recruiting challenges. You know, how do we bring new drivers into the industry? How do we attract, right? So that's obviously today a big piece of what we do. And I don't see that changing much in 5 years, autonomous or not. I mean, we're going to need to all continue to find new ways to attract people. But if anything, I mean, I think the autonomy is exciting for the new age, the new generations, right? Technology, it's sexy, I guess, right? And that's what people are looking for out there. So I don't know that it hinders us to attract people, but we just right now, and even 5 years from now, we're going to have some challenges in terms of attracting people into the industry, and it's going to be important regardless of whether you're talking about autonomy or anything else. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Who would like to be next? Okay, okay.
Good morning, panel. Danny Hefner, Hefner. I'm the Director of Safety and Recruiting for MCO Transport out of Wilmington, North Carolina. I have also been a driver. I started with in the industry about 12 years ago. I put in more than 1,300,000 miles on the road. There are many different things that I see with the autonomy that we should really slow down with this. Now, I've seen the videos. Everybody, I don't know how many people in the room have seen the video where Otto and Budweiser did the first 100-plus mile trip of a delivery where the truck was in full autonomous mode. The driver got out of the seat, went into the sleeper. This, in turn, for me, as just a citizen, to see a truck going down the road with no driver in it, really put me off. And then as a safety director, that brought a lot of things to my mind as well. One, what if you have a steer tire blow? Is that truck going to be able to maintain itself, maintain its lane? I'm talking about anything that has to do with automation. Nothing to do with automation or driver error. An equipment failure, a simple equipment failure. That type of thing can lead to several deaths on a highway. Next, we know that this is going to have all different types of computer interfacing, satellites, GPS, everything. How many of you ever had a computer virus? Homeland Security should really take a look at this. One, vendors should have high levels of encryption in their systems. It won't take but one hacking to take down an entire system, an entire important portion of our entire national infrastructure. That's one thing that should be looked at. You have a vehicle going down the highway with a driver and a sleeper, and you come upon a way station. Is that truck going to recognize going in for a roadside inspection or going through a set of scales? Should they be allowed to operate on the major freeways in large habitation zones? The one truck in the video went through the middle of downtown Denver on the highway with a full load of beer. This being a liquid, of course, it can move. Every driver that is going to be operating one of these vehicles should have a special endorsement. If we require an endorsement for hazmat or for a tanker or for doubles, should they not have an endorsement for a highly automated vehicle that they have been specifically trained and can meet the requirements working with that type of system? Next, the technicians. We have our own maintenance facilities. Our mechanics are the greatest that I've ever worked with. But me personally, as a person out there in the motoring public, could I trust the basic technician to work on this type of system? These are all things that we need to take a look at. Thank you. That's just my comments on it.
Thank you, Mr. Hefner. Did anybody on the panel have anything for him?
And
Okay.
just to add, Shannon, the point the gentleman brought up was excellent, and that is a cybersecurity issue. And we're discussing that within the agency and with NHTSA as well.
Thank you.
Morning. My name is Tom Foster. I'm a captain with the Washington State Patrol. I command our commercial vehicle division. Last name is Foster, F-O-S-T-E-R.
Thank you.
I thought that was a great example that he just gave about a blown tire. You got a tire on a steer axle that blows. Well, how about just a retread that comes off on a trailer and damages a vehicle behind it? I've got some concerns about not having a driver in the driver's seat that can be monitoring everything that's going on. You put somebody in the sleeper berth, or you're at a level 5 and you've got nobody in the vehicle at all. What do I do as law enforcement when I've got to stop that vehicle? Or what does a citizen do when their windshield gets taken out by that retread that comes off? How do they signal that vehicle that there's been a problem? Does it just keep going down the road? Do we have to wait for it at its destination before we can make contact? Sometimes we want to inspect trucks, we need to take enforcement and things like that. So I'd just like you to keep that in mind as you move forward. How do we interact as law enforcement with that vehicle if we need to stop it and we need to intervene at any time? I think having the driver in the driver's seat is extremely important. We've got great drivers in this country. I don't want to minimize the importance of those people. We need to keep them in their seats. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. While it looks like we have a lull, I'm going to make another plug. For those of you who are watching the webcast, please send in your comments to FMCSA. Well, if you're watching, you know the webcast is www.fmcsa.dot.gov. But we want to make sure that we hear from all of you. So please send in your comments and we'll read them.
Tom Balzer, B-A-L-Z-E-R, with the Ohio Trucking Association. First of all, thank you for having these discussions. I think it's vitally important that we stay as best we can in front of this, although I did a talk at the Truckload Carriers Association on this issue, and there is a gigantic void between what is reality and what is the Hollywood version of what's going on. We are a long, long ways from a truly driverless truck, and I think everybody in this room knows that. There's been a lot of comments that are made based on that. The auto beer run was an absolutely excellent marketing ploy to show what that is capable of. But the amount of background work that went into that one load was truly astonishing. They ran that route hundreds of times to map it properly. So that is what we do every day when we're in our cars and we're using, if I can use brand names, Google Maps or Apple iMaps or whatever. That is being transferred back and we're mapping those roads as we go forward. I think the reality of the situation is we have a timing gap between what is capable today and what we need as government to act on today and what happens tomorrow. That, what is going to be capable of and when. Because we may never in our lifetime see what we're planning today because of what's going on. I think there's a huge gap between those two. I also sit on the Smart Columbus task force that is doing a lot of studies out there. And we spend a lot of times talking about platooning and the reality of what the industry knows, the industry body of knowledge, and the engineers and the technology body of knowledge. They were fully ready to put platoon trucks on 35-mile-an-hour city streets, like today. And that was part of the discussion. They were going to time the lights to make sure that that platoon went right through. It was never about, that was like from start to finish. So I think that the reality of the conversations that are had today, such as blown tires and things that we deal with on a regular part, needs to be part of that. We did talk about markings. We felt it was necessary in a platoon situation that the motoring public knows that truck A, who's truck A and who is truck B, and that yes, you can get in between them, but you shouldn't. That that technology is there, but giving the motoring public as much information as we can give them to operate safely around us is what this industry has been vying for years, is to a very educated public. Not having that, especially in a platoon situation, we felt was very detrimental, that people needed to know on that piece. As far as roadside inspections go, all of these systems have self-diagnostics pieces to them that can be used. It would be no different than transferring the data on an ELD out to the law enforcement officer to make sure that the system's operating properly, that would be part of the pre-trip inspection process, that you would run self-diagnostics on these pieces, and it's something that is capable in there. I also believe, and coming from Columbus, where the home of Nationwide is, I respectfully disagree. I think our tech schools in this country is our biggest asset that we need to invest in, and they will adapt. And so will on-the-job training, so will the fleets, to adapt to this type of system. I have my CDL. I have a Twins endorsement. I do not feel you need to have an endorsement to train people on technology. We would need an endorsement on a variety of things, including endorsing ELDs. This is a technological solution. This is not an operating solution. There is a difference, and I think that as you make these plans, you need to plan on the timing issue, and you also need to take a look at the loads. And we found that out through a variety of the decisions the agency has made, is that the load matters. If you are going to be hauling hazmat, I'm fairly certain that allowing automated systems, a completely autonomous trucks, that the hazmat load's going to be the last one that's allowed for, just because of the nature of the product. So I think that all needs to play into that you need to factor in the loads as well as the technology that's part of it. On the hours of service, who knows? I mean, I've been in this, dealing with this industry for about 12 years now, and there's people who've been in this room that have been dealing with it longer than me, and I would believe the hours of service hasn't been settled in 12 years and will remain unsettled for another 25, just because of the changes in technology. I mean, there's a lot of people who can make the argument that if you're not actively at the wheel, that you're, or in the sleeper berth, or, there's a variety of pieces that need to flow with that hours of service piece. I don't know that you're ever going to find a distinct long-term plan when it comes to hours of service. We all wish you all could, but I don't think that that's possible at this particular juncture. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Bowser. Okay, we have one from the internet. This is from Cheryl Gross Glazer, GROSS-GLASER, and she is the Assistant Director of National Center for Mobility Management at the Community Transportation Association of America. And Cheryl writes, the listening session is addressing trucking, but FMCSA regulations also govern motor coach, intercity transportation, intercity transportation, and many interstate bus transit operations in rural and small urban areas. Has any thought been given to required staffing and emergency situations regarding motor coach bus transportation when AV level 4 and 5 become operational? Her second question is there a possibility of separately regulating interstate transit operations that fall under FMCSA jurisdiction? Is it possible that jurisdiction would be shifted to FTA?
Well, it's certainly something that we have to think about, and as we said earlier, we welcome comments on motor coach operations as well. Tom just brought up the hazmat operations, but there's been no discussion about shifting responsibilities within the department, but I assure everybody here as a department that we are working closely together with the agencies and with the Secretary's office, and it's shown, with NHTSA being here, we are working with Federal Highway on a regular basis because infrastructure plays an important role in the advancement of this technology. But we are working with the other modes, and we'll discuss this further as time goes on.
Thank you, Jack. Next, we hear from Matt Watt, W-A-T-T, and he says, hello, my name is, his email address says Matt Watt, but he says, hello, my name is Mark Watt, no industry company affiliation. My question is for all members of the panel. What do you each see as the most immediate regulatory challenge for automated commercial vehicles?
Larry, you want to take that
one? I think one of our immediate challenges would be understanding exactly what is the vehicle capable of doing so that we can get an assessment on the driver responsibilities. For example, if indeed the vehicle can operate in a fully autonomous mode and all the technology has proven itself that we are in a situation where it is safe for the driver to actually get up from the seat and go back in the sleeper berth, trying to get a handle on hours of service and what's the driver workload responsibilities in the event that the driver is not actually running the vehicle but just sitting in the driver's seat and monitoring it and being prepared to intervene at some given point in time. So I think that's one of our big challenges, is to get a handle on that driver responsibility piece of it.
And our next speaker.
Good morning. Ann Farrow with the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, otherwise known as AMVA. Last name is F as in federal, E-R-R-O. So good morning, and thank you. This is a great opportunity. So from the AMVA perspective, of course, many of AMVA's members in the U.S. and Canada are the key credentialing official for drivers, and are, in fact, from the state driver license agencies executing the CDL standards set by FMCSA. So AMVA and our members have had the opportunity to work closely with NHTSA through a grant to develop recommendations for the model state standards, model state guidelines for automated vehicles, autonomous vehicles on the light duty side. And one of the areas has obviously been, who is the driver? Is the driver the operator? Is the driver the vehicle? Where does that transition occur? In the transition period, to support really where Daphne Jefferson started this conversation, which is the interest in supporting the innovation and getting these safety technologies on the road as expeditiously as possible while securing safety. Individual states are identifying ways to certify the drivers of testing autonomous or driverless vehicles. That certification or that special license or special endorsement is happening at the state level because we're talking about the regular driver's license, not the CDL. But again, it's this concept of ensuring that industry has a chance to test in a safe environment and that local communities, just as Tom Balzer talked about the innovation that's going on in Ohio, that communities have an idea that these vehicles are being tested on their roadways, and the credentialing agency has a clear understanding that the individuals doing the operating of the vehicles, sitting in them, responding if there's an equipment failure, taking notes, providing feedback, are actually certified or endorsed in some way or another. Now, at the CDL level, of course, that standard is set at the national level. So I'm just asking if FMCSA has given some consideration to how you will certify or create an exemption or a special identification for the operators in commercial motor vehicles that will be tested in that HACV state. And if, in fact, that process that you do will be noticed to the affected community so they're aware. I think Otto's experiment, they wanted to do it in secret and sort of surprise everybody. That is what it is. That doesn't necessarily work for the kind of deployment testing that I think you want to get to with autonomous CMVs. So again, the heart of the question or recommendation for your consideration is who and how will issue that special certification or endorsement or authority for an operator to operate a CMV in autonomous mode while they're moving through this pilot phase as we transition over this next 5 years, 10 years to driverless automation. Have you all already had some thought on that? If not.
And that's one of the reasons we're here today is, we talk about endorsement, you talk about certification or, of the driver. We want to hear what the thoughts are right now. One of the things we did working with the Volpe Center was a regulatory scan. What regulations can be impacted by this type of technology, and one of them is, the CDL qualification. So we don't have an answer right now, and we're here, and, at some point we will be making decisions based on what we hear. Larry mentioned one of the challenges we have is the lack of data. We don't have the safety data from these carriers and the operational data. We'd love to get some information from it, and, we'd love to work with the industry even closer than what we are, but it is one of the concerns, and it is one of the challenges, and one of the issues that we do want to address is the operator of these vehicles.
Well, just to emphasize my point, these vehicles are happening today.
Absolutely.
And the testing and pilot of them is of great interest to everybody today. And so the urgency is let us all help figure out what's the process to ensure that operators testing them today are in some way certified to be those operators, and that the communities around them, to the extent that it's safe and appropriate, are aware of that testing going on live roadways, and for sure make sure the jurisdictions are aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. We have a new one from the internet. Spencer Chernus, the last name is spelled Chernus. He is with Morgan Stanley Research. He writes, 1, have you considered autonomous platooning as an option that will be a win-win? You have a driver involved in the lead truck, but also get the benefit of autonomous driving. 2, are you in contact with Singapore and the Netherlands, where regulatory authorities have done a lot of work on autonomous driving and have approved them for use on public roads? And 3, what is your approach to incumbent players versus Silicon Valley startups who are developing this technology?
One follow-up comment, thank you for that question, is we have been working with the International Transport Forum. We sponsored a meeting in January, I believe it was, where we did get input from a variety of different European countries and other places as to how they're approaching this, and it was very helpful feedback as we gather information on that topic.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else? Okay, while we're waiting for people in the room, I'll go to the next one on the internet as soon as it connects. Okay. This one is from T. Harris, Harris. It's really small. Thank you, at McNeil U.S. Company. It's jumping, okay. Can we get it back, please? Okay, actually, we have a person here in person, so I'll let you go first while they resolve this.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sean Garney. That's Garney. First, I'd like to thank you, FMCSA, for taking time this morning for this important...
Sean, sorry to interrupt, but please state your affiliation, too.
Oh, I'm with the American Trucking Associations. Sorry. Automated vehicle technology has the potential to dramatically improve nearly all aspects of the trucking industry. These technologies can bring benefits in the areas of safety, productivity, efficiency, and driver health and wellness. How individual carriers choose to incorporate automated technology in their fleets will likely not be a one-size-fits-all application, but rather will depend on each carrier's operation and anticipated return on investment for the technology. As this technology is rapidly developing, it is important that government policy and regulations do not stifle innovation or inhibit the flexibility of carriers to choose automated technologies best suited to their individual needs. From a trucking industry perspective, the role of the federal government in leading the deployment of autonomous technologies is absolutely essential. Our industry relies on the interstate highway system that facilitates the free flow of goods between states. As automated truck technology is commercialized, it is critical that state and local laws do not create disparities that limit commerce and obstruct the successful adoption of these potentially safety and productivity boosting technologies. The federal government must take a clear leadership role and, if necessary, exercise federal preemption. Regulations of the performance of automated truck technology should be solely the responsibility of the federal government, while states should maintain their existing responsibilities, including licensing drivers, registering vehicles, enacting and enforcing traffic laws, regulating motor vehicle insurance and liability, and conducting safety inspections. In September of 2016, NHTSA released the Federal Automated Vehicle Policy, which, although intended by NHTSA to apply to all automated vehicles, was developed with a focus on automated passenger vehicles. It is important that FMCSA address differences between private passenger car operations and the commercial vehicle sector. As a report issued late last year by the American Transportation Research Institute noted that key sections of several federal motor carrier vehicle safety regulations may be candidates for change with the adoption of autonomous trucks, and also identified areas of the CSA program that may be impacted by autonomous technology. ATA support to review the FMCSRs as well as NHTSA's federal motor vehicle safety standards to identify changes that may be necessary to facilitate the introduction of automated technology in commercial vehicles and encourage DOT to move quickly to make any needed changes. Similarly, states should review their existing laws to see where there may be impediments to automated technology, such as following distances that may prohibit platooning. At this time, ATA believes that the current regulatory tools available to FMCSA and NHTSA are well understood by key stakeholders and sufficient for governing the introduction of the operation of autonomous technologies to the trucking industry. Any changes to existing agency authorities should be carefully considered to avoid unintended consequences that may disrupt current operations or slow the development and implementation of new technology. However, streamlining current agency processes to more quickly reach resolution on rulemaking interpretations and other agency actions should be a goal of DOT in order to modernize outdated regulations and remove unintended barriers that inhibit the deployment of innovative technologies that can improve safety and efficiency in our transportation system. As FMCSA moves forward with initiatives to address automated vehicle technologies, we strongly encourage continued outreach to stakeholders for input and comment and proposal. Any guidance to other agency actions should be designed to be flexible with the ability to be quickly modified to account for new developments in automated technologies. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. It's clear that we have an awful lot of questions and not a ton of answers. And I think as we walk down this road, the American Trucking Association and perhaps a number of people in the room are looking to you all to lead, and we hope you do that strongly with a mind towards keeping everybody safe but not stifling future innovation.
Thanks, Sean.
One follow-up question for you. We heard one of the earlier commenters talk about getting a return on investment, that their perspective on the commercial vehicle side was the biggest return on investment would be in the hours of service arena, that if we don't see any benefit there in the hours of service, that we still have to have all these drivers out there and we're not getting a return on investment. So that was one perspective of one of the priority areas. Then we had the web comment basically asking the panel, what do we view as the #1 priority in the regulatory arena if we wanted to try to make sure that there are no impediments to the deployment of highly automated vehicles? I'd like to hear from the ATA perspective, what do you see as one of the #1 areas that we want to focus in if indeed we wanted to try to streamline the regulatory policy process to make sure that we remove any potential impediments to the deployment of HACVs?
That's a great question, Larry. I think, we talk about return on investment in the trucking industry and, removing the driver in order to create additional efficiencies. But, in the event that we get to 4s and 5s, level 4s and 5s, there are other efficiency gains that can be made still with the driver behind the truck. I think the hours of service conversation is one of the more interesting ones that people are having here, but we're probably way ahead of the game on it. So I don't think I can call out a specific regulation, and we think that under the current regulatory structure, that innovation can continue to proceed. And as we get there, as we start to really understand the technology, the benefits of those technologies, then it'll be time to sort of turn to these issues like hours of service and driver health and wellness and the rest of those. So.
And thank you for your comments. And as you said, there are lots of questions and not a lot of answers. But a part of the reason for this event is to hear from stakeholders involved in the process, and appreciate the offer of helping us to move forward. And one of the things that we're doing within the Department of Transportation is really looking across the agencies, whether it be NHTSA, Federal Highways, also our Office of the Secretary Research, Volpe Center, a number of other places where I think we can look to make sure that as a department we're moving forward in a consolidated way, but also making sure that we've got the interests of the industry. We've got our state and local partners as well as AMVA, other organizations, but and our key safety advocates as well. So thank you.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I think we strongly believe that coordination among your government agencies and all the stakeholders in this room is increasingly important. At the ATA, we've developed an automated truck committee that's sort of doing a soup to nuts review of of all things pertinent to automated trucks and developing policies and understanding. So I hope that we can come together in the future in the room and get our folks and your folks together and start answering some of these questions.
So the only thing I would add is, and Daphne, I reinforce her comments, that's where I was headed. I mean, the department, safety is paramount, but at the same time, we're trying not to stifle innovation. And I would just say, from the policy that NHTSA released in September, we then went on to issue some clarifying FAQs that were requested of us, and it addressed some of your comments regarding the roles, the delineation of roles between the states and ourselves. And so I would just take a look back at those questions, those FAQs. Also, the policy, it does cover all vehicles.
Right.
So I do want to make that clear. It does cover the passenger vehicles, but also why we're here today, commercial motor vehicles. Absolutely. The operational aspect, of course, falls under federal motor carrier, their jurisdiction. Yep. So again, we're working together, the modes, and we appreciate all your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Okay, back to Mr. Harris's question. Tom Harris, Harris, he's the Vice President of Concrete Mixers with McNeilis Company. It's a division of Oshkosh Corporation. He asks, what, if any, federal infrastructure investment is targeted toward facilitating the redundant safeguards?
Good question. I mean, all I can say is that federal highways at the table with the infrastructure and so forth, we really haven't talked funding at large right now, but, they're aware of it, we're aware of it, and so forth like that, and I think that's the path down the road that we will address at some point.
Thank you, Jack. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to say something? Oh, and he veered off. Okay. While we have our person approaching the mic, I'd like to remind those of you who are watching from a safe location, not behind the wheel of any kind of automated vehicle, or automated or otherwise, commercial motor vehicle or car, please do send in your comments electronically.
Yes, I'm Tim LaFawn, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Product Safety for the Volvo Group companies here in North America. Hello, panel. Hello, Larry. How are you?
And please spell your last name.
It's Lafon.
Thank you.
And anyway, there is a lot of work to do with automation. Obviously, there's some benefits that we can get today as we are going along that, traveling that path. I mean, automatic emergency braking systems and so forth, electronic stability control systems and so forth are aiding us today. So, just recently we were able to track and ping vehicles and send notices to vehicles if there's a safety-related defect. So, this is really helping us out, but we have to be realistic. There is a long way to go. In regards to operation fully automated on highways and things like that, we have to go through a long path of development, design, from concept and so forth, and that takes time. And at Volvo, we and other manufacturers, we will go through and do our assessment, our risk assessment, and do control test, field test later on. So that all takes time, and we need to work together as far as industry, the government, the state officials, and so forth. So we have to remember a lot of good comments about maintenance, the driver being there, and so forth as we travel down this path. Just application differences with trucking, difference between a trash truck and a highway tractor, big difference. So also environmental conditions with the weather and road pavements and different. It's a lot to think about. In regards to automation, as we move down the path, it's important that we provide warnings, self-diagnostic, things like that. So again, a lot of comments, but a lot of work to do as we work through this together.
Follow-up question on you. Earlier, we heard comment about the need for perhaps doing something with regard to the drivers and their commercial driver's license while we're in this test phase. The pilot tests are being done today. You've got these drivers out there doing tests today. What kinds of training and preparation do you have for any of the Volvo test drivers who are out there doing tests with these automated vehicles?
I don't know specifically what we're doing per se, but there is a very controlled process, meaning we would want to tell the drivers, obviously we want the driver in the seat at all times when operating, because, if you have a steer tire blowout, for example, those are all real-world scenarios that could happen. And, the level of automation that we have today, we need to be cognizant of that. We have to have some control. So I'd spoke with Luke Loy a little bit about this a few months ago. And, before we even put anything out on the road for testing, we would make sure that it's secured and safe for operation. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. We have another one from the internet. This is from Brian Dougherty, Daugherty, and he is with the Motor and Equipment Manufacturers Association. Could the panel discuss the topic of system redundancy for automated commercial vehicles? Will by-wire aircraft levels of redundancy and reliability be required for steering actuators, braking systems, sensors, power systems, etc., for SAE level 3, 4, or 5 vehicles? If not, what levels of reliability and redundancy will be required?
I could go last one.
I think that's a great question, and we'd be open to hearing any suggestions from the industry in terms of the redundancy. Basically, you're getting into a serious design question of how safe is it safe enough to be out there driving by itself? Do you have enough redundancy so that if one part of the system fails, there's another part of the system to detect that failure and resume control or take over immediately? So that's one of the things that we'd want to hear more about in terms of the design of these vehicles. How will we know when the design is robust enough, that it's safe enough? And we've heard about IT security, so how will you know that it's safe enough so that if someone does try to hack into the system, there's enough redundancy there to prevent that from happening and prevent the vehicle from being taken over? So we're interested in any feedback from anyone that wants to share their thoughts and views with us.
You may just want to take it off and hold it.
It
It just clips out. Yeah, just there you go.
All right, that'll work. It's me, not the mic. So, good morning. My name is Ognan. Last name is long. It's spelled Stojanovski. So, just Ognan. I work for Uber's Advanced Technologies Group, and we're the company that was behind the Colorado delivery that was mentioned a few times. So, I'll have a brief statement to read out loud. And I just want to say that we're really excited that this panel is taking place. And I want to note that our suggestions offered that are intended to simplify the applications of the FMCSA's rules today so that they can be followed and enforced today while providing some flexibility to accommodate the various ways that HACVs are going to be used in the future. And we see this as still well, at the very beginning of the conversation, but still relatively early stages, and we look forward to continuing the conversation for the foreseeable future going forward. So the first, we want to note that we believe that no changes to existing regulations are needed for HACVs when a person is required to be in the driver's seat. If the person behind the wheel is responsible for ensuring the safe operation of that vehicle, then it is not necessary for the FMCSA to make changes to its regulations. Like the drivers of conventional commercial motor vehicles, a driver of HACV should, amongst other things, obtain a commercial driver's license, satisfy the background checks and medical examination criteria, avoid improperly using smartphones while driving, log their hours of service correctly, and ensure that the vehicle has been inspected, repaired, and maintained. Operators required to be behind the steering wheel of HACVs perform the same duties as drivers of conventional CMVs. They're responsible for the vehicle's proper control, for monitoring the driving environment, and for safely using any onboard technologies, just like all drivers. Existing regulatory measures already ensure that the drivers are appropriately trained and qualified to perform these driving tasks. Indeed, under current regulations, as was just noted by the gentleman from Volvo, we're already seeing the safety benefits of advanced technologies which rightly require a driver to be attentive and engaged in the driving task 100% of the time. Now, for HACVs that will operate on a sustained basis without human supervision, then the FMCSA may need to develop new regulatory approaches. In autonomous vehicles, a driver is not required to supervise, intervene, or otherwise be prepared to retake control of the vehicle, even during any fallback maneuvers that may become necessary. Because these vehicles will indeed be used differently than conventional CMVs and HACVs with drivers behind the wheel, the FMCSA may consider modifying some regulations. For example, as was noted a few times, it may be appropriate to allow the driver to record time spent in the sleeper berth as sleeper berth time while the vehicle is in motion. On the other hand, if such vehicles simply require the push of a button to engage the driving system, then there is probably no need to develop specialized training or new driver's license endorsements. We therefore think it would be highly beneficial for the FMCSA to recognize the fundamental distinction between HACVs that require a driver behind the wheel, which are commonly described as advanced driving assistance systems, and those that do not require any human engagement, often labeled autonomous vehicles. It is only autonomous vehicles that may require new regulatory approaches once we better understand the ways these technologies should be used. I also want to note that the FMCSA requested comment on how enforcement officials could identify CMVs capable of various levels of automated operation. However, determining a vehicle's level of automation on the SAE scale cannot be done with a physical inspection. It requires extensive on-road testing and an understanding of the underlying software. It is simply not a straightforward task to assign a level of automation, even for those of us developing the technologies. So we suggest instead of attempting to discern a vehicle's theoretical SAE level, enforcement efforts could focus on whether the HACV is manned by a person that is ultimately responsible for its safe operation. This would provide an objective, reliable, and practical way for regulators and enforcement officers to distinguish between the two basic types of HACVs I just described. This approach also offers a straightforward way to leverage today's regulations without adding uncertain layers of complexity or the need for enforcement officials to develop extensive technical expertise, both of which would delay the introduction of important safety benefits. So thank you again for your valuable time and attention. We look forward to continued engagement with all of you, including here at CVSA on Wednesday afternoons, Enforcement and Industry Modernization Panel. We're also going to have, for those interested, one of our trucks available for display at the parking lot of the Aloft Atlanta Hotel, which is just 2 blocks, a 5-minute walk from here on Wednesday afternoon, and we're coordinating with that CVSA session on that. And me and my colleagues will be around. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Stojanowski.
I have one question. You talked about no driver for the autonomous vehicle operation. Are you there now?
No, we're not there now.
Okay, that's what I thought. I mean, we're talking about, you talked about it's tough to distinguish between the different levels, 3, 4, and 5, and I agree with you, but, you were talking like a level 5, correct, Ogden?
I think if you wanted to apply the SAE scales, I'd say the levels 4 and 5 would be what I'm talking about when I talk about autonomous vehicles. I think a lot of the confusion that arises here, again, is around this level 3 operation, right? And I think several people brought that up, and I think in that case it really makes sense to, that's not something that our company operates it, but it might make sense to basically require those drivers to be fully engaged 100% of the time instead of relying on them to somehow be roused at some certain notice to retake control of the vehicle. And I think the gentleman's name was Anthony from the bus company. Because then they might not really be engaged when things start to go wrong, right? So it might as well, for level 3 type systems, make sense for people to be engaged at all times so that we have a clear and workable way of knowing who was really in charge instead of potentially confusing human-machine interaction issues, which I think underlie a lot of the more cautious approaches here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Richard Huang. I'm with Daimler Trucks. I'm the manager of engineering and safety.
Thank you again for the time.
Excuse me, would
the
you spell your
comments.
last name, please?
Sorry, Huang.
Thank you.
First name is Ritchie, Ritchie. And certainly the comments everybody's making today helps us, especially as technology developers, as this is an important phase really for the evolution of these vehicles. So I have a prepared statement, it's very general, I'd like to read to you today. Daimler Trucks North America, DTNA, thanks to FMCSA for the opportunity to participate in today's listening session regarding highly automated commercial vehicles. DTNA is the leading manufacturer of trucks in the United States and consists of the Freightliner, Detroit Diesel, Western Star, and Thomas Built bus brands. On May 5th, 2015, DTNA unveiled the first automated commercial vehicle, the Freightliner Inspiration Truck, that was licensed to operate on the open public highway in the United States. This revolutionary truck displayed DTNA's leadership in automation and commitment to developing cutting-edge technology that enhances safety, efficiency, and connectivity. We strongly urge FMCSA to participate in the HACV space with transparency and openness, working closely with DTNA as it considers the appropriate methods to ensure the highest possible levels of safety during the operation of HACVs. DTNA firmly believes in a data-driven approach to safety and requests that FMCSA adopt a similar approach that is rooted in sound research and practicality when evaluating HACVs. DTNA looks forward to collaborating with FMCSA on safety and appreciates FMCSA's willingness to take a leadership role on this topic. Again, I'd like to repeat that it is important that you take this leadership role and that you're assertive and clear with the intentions. And thank you again for this opportunity to comment on this important issue. And please do not hesitate to contact DTNA should you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie. As our next speaker walks up, I'd like to make another plug. For those of you who are watching the webcast, please send us in your comments or questions for the group assembled, and we will read those along with the ones in the room. Go ahead.
Hi, Andy Barnes, B-A-R-N-E-S, with the Alberta Motor Transport Association, the Trucking Association in the province of Alberta. Just one comment. Up in Canada, we are progressing very rapidly with highly automated motor vehicles too. The University of Alberta Centre of Smart Transportation is testing now, is setting up a test track. I would just like to promote the fact that talks between Transport Canada, Canadian Council on Motor Transport Administrators, and the FMCSA would be recommended. We're already looking at permitting these things. How can these things operate on roads up north? So I think that opening that channel of communications will allow for those regulatory changes in a smoother fashion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point.
Thank you. Who'd like to be next? Is there anyone who would like to speak as well to the law enforcement aspect of it? We haven't heard much about that yet today.
Good morning. Woody Chambers, C-H-A-M-B-E-R-S, Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. In a matter of Federal Motor Carrier roadside inspections or on the fleet, I was out there for 45 years, long haul, and the mind wanders, even with shifting and braking and maneuvering and everything else that's involved. I simply can't imagine, and we'll just talk about this level 3 with the driver in the truck, an operator would pay as much attention as we do now. It's just simply not possible. So these systems are going to have to work, and they're going to have to be 100% reliable. Right now, the only system that's checked in a level 1 is ABS as far as electronic systems. There's nothing as far as lane departure, advanced braking, or rollovers, all of these other systems that are available to the industry, because the driver's there always to take care of things, we hope. Are you anticipating another level of inspection? Whether it'd be a section of level 1 or an entirely different level that would apply only to autonomous vehicles. And for that reason, I think they should be identified too, where these systems are indeed checked during a roadside inspection.
So I think you asked the question, but I think that's something that we will have to work with CVSA, and there's actually a committee that is looking at that right now, at the inspection levels or the inspection procedures. We're not there right now with changing the inspection procedures, but I know at the committee level at CVSA, we will be participating with them. And
Okay.
obviously, the committee meeting's open to the industry and enforcement as well.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Woody. Next, we have one from the internet. This is from Urban Johnson, Jon-Son, and he is with the National Motor Freight Traffic Association. And he writes, the NMFTA would encourage FMCSA and NHTSA to provide a regulatory framework that supports the development of emerging technologies such as autonomous vehicles and active safety technology through innovative support for trial technology programs. We would also like to reiterate the need for careful consideration of cybersecurity, not only of the autonomous vehicle systems themselves, but also that of the surrounding infrastructure such as vehicle-to-vehicle, what we call V2V, and vehicle-to-infrastructure, V2I, communication. As such, we encourage FMCSA and NHTSA to work with industry partners to continue to explore cybersecurity in the commercial vehicle ecosystem to ensure that the adoption of new technology is consistent with cybersecurity best practices. Anybody have
We
any-
agree with them.
We agree.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
something that we agree with them.
Mhm. Okay. We have another. Make it a little bigger. Okay. This is from Jason Klempin, Klempin. He is the district, a little smaller. He is the district freight coordinator with Florida Department of Transportation. And he writes, I first want to say thank you for having this listening session, for the opportunity for the public and other government agencies to be a part of this important topic. I hear a lot about the rush to get this automation up and running, but I'm not hearing a lot about the financial responsibility that it will take to get this program going and keeping it up to par to maintain the need for safety. While the driver shortage is mainly due to the fact of trucking companies not wanting or able to pay for the driver's experience, the reality is the freight, this keeps closing on me. It's stuck now. Okay, we're connecting. Excuse me, technical difficulties. Let me start that sentence over. While the driver shortage is mainly due to the fact of trucking companies not wanting or not being able to pay for the driver's experience, the reality is that the freight cost has to go up. The driver is still getting paid in the meantime, though all the levels until the driver is no longer in the truck. Bottom line is cost versus safety. The consumer pays for the process. So how is it going to be explained to the public except where freight costs have gone up in order to accommodate all the expenses?
Well, I hear the question. A lot of those are business decisions that I think that the industry will make at some point. So.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
I brought up earlier, someone talked about, the systems that we're at right now, we're really talking about is 3 and 4 maybe, 3.5 or something, and I should have asked the Daimler representative and the Uber representative, do they have systems that alert that driver to try to overcome that distraction or the fatigue perspective of a driver? And, if somebody could address that.
They're coming back up to the microphone.
Thanks.
Hello again. Yes, I mean, it's for us, it's an R&D phase. So we definitely take a look at the driver. We have to look at their engagement. We have to look at the technology limitations as well. I think that's something that we would like to interact with you, with FMCSA, with NHTSA as well, because it's important to us. We look at automation as building blocks. You just don't jump straight into full automation. It's a slow process, and for us, it's a very strict regimen for the development and engineering evaluations that we do. So, yes, we do take a look at the driver. We do take measurements of the driver. We do understand where they're at. And I can't share specifics, but I do want to try to answer your question to address that, yes, we are.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd echo the same thing. We're in R&D phase, and I'd say, I'd sort of emphasize again that we're in more of a maybe binary view of things where you either have to be paying attention all the time, or the system is actually good enough for you to not be paying attention any of the time. We don't want to play in this middle ground where you kind of have to be on alert, but not really. It might be able to drive and might not at times, right? So, and right now we're in the R&D phase mostly, and we're in the pay attention all the time. And we have various ways we ensure that, some technological requiring the driver engagement. Again, for now, because there are our own trucks, our own drivers, we operate with two-man crews, so they're responsible for keeping each other honest and alert as well. We have, basically the co-driver also monitors all of the sensor inputs, so that's some of the ways we try to do that. Right now, so the whole goal is to not have people be in a position where they're irrationally pushing the bounds of technologies or maybe pretending the system is better than it really is, and that's what I think would really lead to the problems, even more so than some fatigue issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I'm not that tall.
No, you just may want to.
Good morning. It's Patrick O'Brien, O-B-R-I-A-N, with Excursion Trailways. Just a real quick comment to think about also. As an owner-operator, it seems as though the insurance companies are having more and more impact on our decisions that we're making. And I don't know if anyone from an insurance company is here, but it'd be interesting to get their take on this and how they envision something like this being covered and what their research and risk management has to say about that issue as well. So that is one of the big decision factors on an owner-operator is liability and further down the road with the vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Griffiths?
Okay, I'm back. Two additional things. We hear a lot about trucks, but I'm on the bus, motor coach, school bus, all that. I'm on the passenger carrier side. One of the things that's not mentioned in this is automation and ADA. Usually what we have is this level of customer service where if anything happens to a person on the bus, the person gets sick, for example, or they have any particular needs, the operator is there to address that. In automation, there seems to be nothing there that I can see directly that would address those needs of a sick passenger or a person that has a special need, like two children on the bus fighting, or people getting certain situations happening that involve passenger carriers. That's the first thing. Something would need to be put in place in that aspect where I think there should not be a passenger carrier vehicle without an individual on it. Whether that person is considered at that point of automation a driver, a monitor, whatever they're considered, they should still be in place. Address your other issue about driver fatigue. Ford had hired in autonomous vehicle testing professional drivers, and they've made a decision to not do that anymore because the professional drivers were falling asleep. There was just no input. Driving requires a constant amount of input from the person that's supposed to be in control of the vehicle. When you take away that level of input, you take away their level of consciousness to what they're supposed to be doing. And that further enhances my statement before about tossing a driver into the middle of a situation. Now he's thinking about, hey, this is a good book, and something goes wrong, and now you have to completely change or be now focused on this other issue.
Question that came to my mind that didn't come up when all the other passenger carriers had taken the microphone, and that's passenger acceptance. Based on the customers that you deal with on a regular basis, how do you view passenger acceptance of potentially, at some point in the future, having an autonomous motor coach that's going to take them to their destination and there's no driver at the controls?
Realistically, there's some people, the younger generation are kind of curious about it. I know some people who say, I can't wait. But then if there's no responsibility, again, if they're not going to be, they're saying, oh, well, I can read my book, I can do this. I said, no, that's not what the rules say. The rules say you have to be paying attention. They said, well, what's the point of having an autonomous vehicle if I still have to pay attention to what the vehicle is doing? People on the bus, that's going to be an interesting, because I've asked some of those questions to people. The seniors are like, they're like, nope. But, I mean, eventually as things go on, as long as the industry continues to prove itself, in a safe fashion, as long as there's no real severe instances, then the acceptance, like in everything else, will grow. Everybody has a cell phone right now. Back in the day, that was something that didn't really exist. So the acceptance will go along. And like I said, again, simulation to do some testing instead of all this on-road live stuff. I think that might be an assistance in that too.
Thank you, Anthony. We have another one from the webcast. Avery Weiss, that's Avery-Vise, and he is the president of TransComply, writes, this is more of a commercial social issue, not technical, but is FMCSA concerned about how talk of HACVs might affect the decision of individuals to become, to become commercial drivers and view the profession as viable long-term?
Well, we're aware of the ATRI study that talked about, driver health and wellness and a different set of driver skill sets. But it's something that we're going to have to work together closely with the industry and the associations out there to address those concerns. But we've seen some of the studies on these impacts.
Thank you, Jack. Anybody else who'd like to say something?
Just a couple comments. The captain from the Highway Patrol brought up, the blown tire and how do you react to that. And we talked about the driver in the seat versus the driver in the sleeper berth, but we didn't hear anything about the physics. I mean, you have a drive, and I'm just curious if anybody's done any research or knows more information on that, but you have a situation in a vehicle where a blown tire happened or something happens and a driver has to react. I mean, physics. I don't know if a driver who would be in a sleeper berth or be in an office behind the wheel or something like that, how that driver would physically be able to get to that driver's seat to take over. And that's a consideration. And I'm sure the people are doing the research on that, but I was just curious if anybody has any information on that. But sure, physics may impact a driver from getting from A to B, the driver's seat. So just a thought.
Hello. Brian Spoon, S-P-O-O-N, O-O-I-D-A. Larry, Jack, Shannon, nice to see you all
Good
again.
to see you too.
My question would be along those lines in the decision-making process of an automated vehicle. In the situation in which the automated vehicle is going to be involved in a crash, the choice between that is we are going to hit this brick wall or we are going to deviate and there are a group of children coming off of a school bus crossing in a crosswalk. What decision and what would be the process in which that automated vehicle would make the decision? I'm assuming the automated vehicle's idea is to protect the driver as much as possible, not necessarily protecting the public outside of that vehicle as much as possible. So what choice does our automated vehicle make? A wall or a group of school children crossing in a crosswalk? Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'll comment to that. The only thing I would say is this is an area that we do acknowledge is a concern. And again, we are looking to hear from you, and also, the data is very important. So anything that can be provided, along the way, those are the things that we need to take a look at, and also work with industry, for industry to actually, come to a consensus along with the public of what's acceptable and what's not.
Thanks, Dee. Anyone else like to make a statement today? Okay, and there are no more questions from the webcast? Okay. Anybody? Going once? Okay. If there's no one else in the room who'd like to say anything, I'm going to turn it over to Jack Van Steenberg, our Chief Safety Officer.
Well, I thank you very much for your comments, and, by listening to you today, and, we tried to listen a lot and maybe ask some clarifying questions, and I think by listening we learned an awful lot, and that was basically it today. We wanted to listen to you, and we'll look over the comments that you provided today and the comments that you'll provide for the next several months through July 17th, I believe the docket's open for. And collectively, as a department and through the leadership of the Secretary of Transportation, we'll make decisions on the path forward for all autonomous vehicles operating in the United States. And we will do that working with all of you here today and all of the industry, the safety groups and enforcement communities out there. So there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to do, we're aware of it, and we're open for more information. So I thank you for taking the time today, thank you for speaking to us today, and we're all in it together, and we hope to address this in the near future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And if any of you has any information if you had a statement or anything that you read today, or you have any more information, please hand it to me and we'll make sure that it gets put in the docket.